From this point, we move from behavioral therapy to the second level of intervention, therapy that addresses underlying causes. To understand why this shift is necessary, consider a situation that is unfortunately common in real life. A person sincerely makes every effort to change. They try harder. They exercise more willpower. And yet, either nothing improves, or even worse, their efforts produce the exact opposite of what they hoped for. This kind of experience inevitably creates a personal psychological crisis. That is why we move beyond simply changing behavior. We are no longer talking about just anyone. At the extreme, we are talking about the patient who comes to a psychoanalyst. Here we encounter an important difference between two major psychological perspectives. William James viewed willpower as one of the central forces behind personality development. Freud, however, offered a very different interpretation. According to Freud, forcing yourself through sheer will often creates new psychological symptoms rather than solving existing ones. A person wants to eliminate an unwanted symptom. Naturally, the first instinct is to suppress it, to control it, to push it away, to overcome it through determination. But Freud argued that suppression does not eliminate the underlying conflict. Instead, it often increases anxiety. In some cases, he even described it as producing a kind of psychological paralysis. The harder a person struggles against the symptom alone, the more difficult it becomes to manage their own behavior. Why does this happen? Freud's answer is surprisingly simple. The problem often begins much earlier. The person has misunderstood the question they are trying to answer. And if the question itself is mistaken, no amount of determination can produce the right solution. The direction of behavior is flawed from the beginning. That is the true source of the difficulty. In these situations, the obstacle is not imposed by the outside world. It is created by the individual themselves. The personal question has been formulated incorrectly. This is a delicate topic, but an important one. A meaningful personal decision must always involve a genuine choice. There must be a real alternative, a true either-or. Freud once described this contrast symbolically through two opposing life tendencies: eros, the drive toward life, growth, and creation, and thanatos, the drive toward destruction and self-destruction. Only when both possibilities genuinely exist can a meaningful decision be made. But if the question itself eliminates any real alternative, then there is no true choice at all. Literature offers many remarkable examples of this kind of psychological mistake. Few writers explored it more deeply than Fyodor Dostoevsky. Consider the famous question asked by Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. Before committing murder, he asks himself, "Am I merely a trembling creature, or do I have the right?" He believes he is making an act of courage, an act of will. From the outside, it certainly appears that way. But psychologically, something very different is happening. The problem is not simply the crime. The problem is the question itself. It has been formulated incorrectly, and because the question is flawed, every answer leads toward psychological collapse. There is no healthy path hidden inside it, only different versions of the same internal conflict. If someone could have stopped Raskolnikov before the crime, the most important conversation would not have been about morality. It would have been about motivation. What is truly driving this decision? What unconscious needs are hidden beneath it? Those are precisely the questions explored in therapy, focused on underlying causes. Notice something else. If Raskolnikov believes he has the right to kill another person, then he simultaneously proves that he remains psychologically trapped by the very fears he is trying to escape. The conflict becomes a closed loop, a neurotic circle with no real exit. Allow me to offer a personal hypothesis. This is not Freud's explanation. It is simply one possible way of understanding such mistakes. Psychologists sometimes describe adolescence as a period in which people struggle to find their proper social role. They gradually learn who they are and how they fit into society. When this process becomes confused, psychologists sometimes speak of role confusion. But in Raskolnikov's case, perhaps something slightly different occurs. Not confusion of roles, confusion of meanings. To understand this idea, let us briefly turn to the work of Alexei Leontiev. Leontiev proposed that human experience can be understood through three different kinds of meaning. The first is biological meaning. Is something beneficial or harmful? The second is social meaning. Is it socially acceptable or unacceptable, right or wrong? The third is personal meaning. Is something true or false for the individual? According to this interpretation, Raskolnikov's mistake lies in confusing these different levels. He judges questions of truth using the language of usefulness. Instead of asking whether something is morally or personally true, he asks whether it is useful. And these are fundamentally different questions. This kind of confusion appears surprisingly often. Many people remember the famous cultural debate asking, which is more important, Shakespeare or a pair of boots? At first glance, it sounds like a meaningful comparison, but psychologically, the question itself is flawed. It compares two entirely different categories. Culture is being evaluated according to practical utility. Someone may spend years trying to answer such a question. They may argue passionately, defend their position, exert tremendous willpower. Yet eventually, they may still find themselves sitting in the office of a psychoanalyst. Not because they lacked determination, but because they began with the wrong question. A similar story comes from philosopher Alexander Piatigorsky. A journalist once asked him, "What practical use are philosophers?" His reply was beautifully simple. A philosopher does not exist to be useful. A philosopher exists so that philosophy may exist. That answer points us toward the next stage of psychological development. Eventually, a person may reach what psychologists sometimes call an autotelic state. An activity becomes valuable for its own sake. The goal no longer exists outside the action. The action itself becomes meaningful. At that point, behavior flows naturally. There is no longer a struggle between external effort and internal resistance. The person has finally understood the genuine motive behind what they are doing. And once the motive becomes clear, purposeful action can unfold without inner conflict.